I never thought my own family would be able to erase me from their lives so unhesitatingly, without a trace of regret, as if I were some useless object, old and broken, to be thrown away. But that's exactly what happened 10 years ago. Sometimes it feels like a lifetime has passed, and sometimes it feels like yesterday, because the wound left by that day still hurts, throbbing somewhere deep inside, reminding me of itself every time I hear someone say the word family. My name is Brenda, I'm 30 now, but back then, on that terrible day, I was a 20-year-old girl, still naive, with a head full of hope and the belief that parental love is something unconditional, not dependent on money, circumstances, or mistakes. I was a sophomore in college, trying my best, living at home to avoid rent and save a little for my future. I thought we were a normal family, not perfect, of course, but kind and strong. Like the house I grew up in, I had a father who I believed would always be my rock, a mother who I considered my quiet home, and an older brother, Mark, the same one who once taught me to ride a bike and protected me at school. I thought they loved me. I was wrong. That weekend started like any other. The girls, Sarah and Jessica, and I had planned a short trip to a neighboring state, just to relax after midterms. We sang songs along the way, laughed, ate chips from the same bag, discussed teachers, and made plans for the next semester. In that moment, I felt light, alive, and happy. Returning home on Sunday evening, I had no idea that in a matter of minutes, everything I knew about my life would crumble. When I turned onto our street, the sun was already setting, and the house where I grew up stood quiet, with golden reflections on the windows. But at that moment, something within me trembled. I immediately noticed the garage door was ajar, and some boxes were visible inside. Dad must have finally decided to sort out his old things, I thought with a slight smile, remembering how he'd promised to do so for 5 years. I walked into the house, calling loudly over my shoulder, "Mom, Dad, I'm back." My school bag thudded to the floor, and I expected, as usual, to hear a response of, "How was your trip, dear?" But Mom emerged from the kitchen, and the expression on her face stopped me in my tracks. It was empty, hard, and alien. Dad was sitting at the table with a newspaper, but I could tell he wasn't reading, just pretending to be busy, just to avoid looking me in the eye. "What are those boxes in the garage?" I asked, trying to keep my voice calm, even though my heart was already racing. Mom answered without blinking, "It's your stuff." I chuckled nervously. "My stuff? What, you're planning on renovating without me? You could have waited, I would have helped." I tried to joke, but the words sounded hollow, as if I were speaking through glass. Mom didn't smile. "It's not a renovation, Brenda. We packed your stuff because you have to leave today." I froze. For a second, the air vanished, the room spun. "What?" I whispered, feeling the ground beneath my feet go soft. Dad flipped a page of the newspaper without looking up. Mom stood straight, clasping her hands, as if afraid she might shake. "Mark brought his girlfriend home yesterday. She's pregnant. They're living here. We're turning your room into a nursery." I stared at her, not believing a word. It all sounded so absurd, as if someone had staged a bad play right in my living room, but she wasn't joking. "And there's one more thing," she added, looking somewhere over my head. "We can't pay your tuition anymore. We need the money for Mark's family and the baby." At that moment, my legs seemed to give out. I grabbed the wall to steady myself. "You can't be serious," I managed to choke out, feeling my voice tremble. "I'm in the middle of a semester. What should I do?" My father finally spoke, still hiding his eyes behind the newspaper. "You're an adult now, Brenda, figure it out." His words struck me harder than any scream. I looked at them both, trying to find even a hint that they were my parents. But before me stood two strangers, indifferent, calm, as if they had simply signed some document that had nothing to do with their lives. Mark wasn't home, of course he wasn't. I went up to my room, or what was left of it. The walls were covered in tape marks where my posters had once hung. The bed was torn, the blanket thrown off, the sheets removed. On the bare mattress sat cardboard boxes, carelessly sealed, with my name written across them in black marker. I looked at it all and suddenly realized, I really wasn't in this house anymore. First, I called my best friend, hoping that at least she would save me that night, let me stay with her, even on the floor or the old couch. But she sighed and confessed that she lived in a tiny dorm room with barely enough room to turn around without bumping into her roommate. "Brenda, if I could, I'd take you right away," she said quietly, but we don't even have room for a suitcase. After that conversation, I felt a panicked emptiness tighten in my chest, but I didn't give up. I started calling other friends, frantically going through their names, as if any of them could be my salvation, but some already had relatives living there, some had small children, some were renting a corner from strangers, and without exception, there was no room even for one lost girl and her cardboard boxes. Then I realized there was only one person left I could call without fear of being rejected, my grandmother. When she answered, I could barely squeeze out the words, explaining what had happened. Choking with humiliation, as if it were my own fault, but her voice, warm and strong, like an old wool blanket, immediately changed everything. Of course you can stay with me, dear, she said, and I heard the tremor in her voice, not anger, but pain. But, Brenda, what about your studies? And then I couldn't take it anymore. I burst into tears. I sat on the bare mattress, surrounded by boxes containing my books, clothes, and past, crying, holding the phone to my ear. They said they won't pay anymore. I don't know what to do, Grandma, I squeezed out, feeling the words turn into sobs. Don't worry about it now, she replied firmly, and there was so much confidence in her voice that for the first time that day, I could breathe. Just come, we'll figure something out. I gathered everything I could carry. My old, scratched Toyota looked like it was about to fall apart from exhaustion, but I squeezed everything I could into it: clothes, a laptop, a couple of textbooks, and 3 photo albums, the only things I couldn't leave behind. When I opened one of them and saw us all, Mom, Dad, Mark, me as a little girl in a yellow dress with curly hair, I felt dizzy. These photos suddenly became a reminder of what I'd lost. I closed the album, as if afraid the photos would speak. I left the larger items, the bed, the table, the old bookcase, behind me, promising myself to come back for them when I was back on my feet. I drove to my grandmother's, wiping away tears with the back of my hand, and kept telling myself that all of this was temporary, just a transitional moment from which I would emerge. When I arrived, my grandmother was already standing on the porch, wearing her old knitted cardigan, holding a mug of tea, as if she'd been waiting for me forever. She didn't say a word, just opened her arms, and as soon as I got out of the car, I fell into her arms, sobbing again like a child. She stroked my hair, quietly saying, "Hush, darling, it's okay, I'm with you, I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, I felt like for the first time that day, someone was truly seeing me. When I'd calmed down a bit, we sat at her kitchen table, the same one where I'd once eaten homemade scones with jam, and drank tea with lemon. I told her everything as it happened, about the garage, the boxes, the coldness in my mother's voice. She listened silently, but her eyes glistened with tears, and at one point she placed her hand on mine. I have some savings, she said finally, as if making up her mind. Not much, about 20,000. It's yours, if you need it, for your studies. I won't let my granddaughter drop out of college because her parents are crazy. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to protest, to say I couldn't take her money, that it was too much, but deep down I knew it wasn't just help. It was a lifeline thrown into the very darkness. That night, lying on the fold-out sofa where I'd once slept as a child, I stared at the ceiling and made a vow to myself. I would finish college, build my own life, and never again let anyone decide for me who I should be and where I belong. The next morning, I called Sarah, my college roommate, and asked if she and Jessica wanted to share an apartment together. We quickly realized it was the best option for everyone, cheaper than dorms and more freedom. Within a week, we found a small, 2-bedroom apartment near campus, threadbare carpet, an old stove, a dripping faucet, but it was all ours. And that word meant so much that I cried tears of joy as I unpacked the boxes. Grandma's money covered most of my tuition. I already had a partial scholarship, and I decided to earn the rest myself. I found a waitressing job at a restaurant near campus, and later found a part-time data entry job on weekends. 3 years flew by in a haze of textbooks, endless cups of coffee, and shifts where I stayed up late into the night. I'd wake up at 5 in the morning to study before morning lectures, then rush to the restaurant, then back to class, then back to work. Sometimes I'd catch myself talking to customers on autopilot, but even in those moments, I felt alive. My roommates, Sarah and Jessica, became like family to me. They'd leave dinner in the fridge for me when I came home late, write reminders on my mirror like "You can do this, Brenda," and organize mini quizzes while I tucked my hair into a ponytail and put on my apron. We supported each other, and it gave me strength. Our small apartment became the only place where I felt truly safe, where the walls, though thin as cardboard, held not only warmth but also the fragile hope that life might still work out, even when the old heating failed again in winter, and we slept wrapped in coats and scarves, huddled together on the sofa for warmth. I still felt a strange peace inside, because this was my life, built on my own efforts, not at the mercy of others' decisions. When the neighbors threw late-night parties and the music blared until dawn, we laughed, stuffed pillows into our ears, and said that at least we had a roof over our heads, albeit a noisy one, but our own. Giving up was impossible, not after everything I'd been through, not after my parents threw me out of their house as if I was blocking their breathing. Sometimes, on the hardest nights, I imagined their faces, my mother's with her perfectly coiffed hair and my father's, obscured by a newspaper, and I quietly repeated to myself that I could handle it, that they hadn't managed to break me. I never called them myself, didn't write, didn't seek out meetings, but news still found its way to me, through my grandmother. She'd call me every week, ask how I was doing, how my studies were, whether I was eating well, and then, as if reluctantly, she'd share what was happening with everyone else. "Mark got married last month," she said one day when I was in my 3rd year. "It was a small ceremony, but your parents arranged everything perfectly." I smiled, though my heart ached. Of course. They'd made every effort, they always made every effort when it came to Mark. A few months later, my grandmother brought it up again, cautiously. "Your brother and his father-in-law have started a business," she said, "selling electronic components. Your mother couldn't be more proud of it." I vividly imagined my mother gathering relatives and neighbors around her at family celebrations, talking about her golden son, boasting that their business was growing, that they would soon be rich. My grandmother said my parents had even taken out a second mortgage on their house to invest in Mark's company, and there was a note of worry in her voice. "It's quite a large loan," she said, and I immediately realized she was worried not only about them but also about herself, since some of her savings were in the same bank, under the same collateral. "That's their problem, Grandma," I replied, trying to keep my voice calm, though something inside me was pricking. Meanwhile, I simply continued working. Life left me no time for regrets. The summer before my senior year, I finally landed an internship at a marketing firm. The salary was almost nominal, but it meant I could quit my data entry job, get at least a couple of nights' sleep, and, for the first time in a long time, allow myself to breathe without guilt. With each passing day, I felt my brain shift back to focusing on growth rather than survival. My grades, which had been slipping due to chronic fatigue, rose again. In my final semester, I even made the dean's list. Me. The same girl who was kicked out of the house with boxes under her arm. Graduation day felt like a dream. I sat among hundreds of other students in caps and gowns, feeling the sun on my face and my heart beating too fast. Applause echoed around me. Parents waved flags. Someone shouted their children's names. I looked around the crowd. Grandma was there, in her light jacket, beaming, as if the day belonged to her too. Next to her stood Sarah and Jessica's families, waving at us, crying and laughing all at once. My parents weren't there, of course, and Mark wasn't either, but I didn't feel empty. I felt pride, that pure, warm pride that can't be bought or faked. After the ceremony, Grandma hugged me so tightly I could hardly breathe. "I'm so proud of you, Brenda," she said, her eyes shining. So proud. Those words meant more than anything else. She handed me an envelope containing a check, not much, but enough to cover my first month's rent in the new place. I held it in my hands like a ticket to a new life. After graduating with a degree in business administration, I found a job at a mid-sized company. The salary was modest but stable, and after years of struggle, that was almost a luxury. I rented a small studio apartment, just one room, a tiny kitchen, and a window overlooking the parking lot, but it felt like I was living in a palace because it was all mine. The next few years were spent incessantly working. I took on extra projects, agreed to work weekends, and did more than was required because I knew that was the only way I could grow. With each promotion, I felt my life gradually become more stable. Savings began to accumulate, at first just for a rainy day, then for my dream, the one that had warmed me in the darkest times, of my own home, where no one would ever tell me, "You have to leave." Life settled into a measured rhythm: work, occasional meetings with friends, weekly calls to my grandmother. I dated a few men, but they all ended quickly. Some couldn't keep up with my pace, others simply didn't understand why I couldn't. Trust, my therapist once said, this is the consequence of family rejection. I just nodded. He was right. I learned to live without support, but forgetting what it was like to be rejected was much harder. When I turned 29, my grandmother called me in the evening, and I immediately sensed something special in her voice, not anxiety, not sadness, but a kind of barely restrained amusement. Brenda, she began, as if bracing herself for my disbelief, your brother has made a big mess. I put down my mug of tea and sat up straight, already anticipating that the story would be worth listening to the end. What is it this time? I asked, trying to keep the mockery out of my voice, though a premonition of some ironic justice was already simmering inside. My grandmother said, lowering her voice, as if someone might overhear us, made a deal with some supplier from Asia behind his father-in-law's back. He paid everything in advance because the price was lower than others. I chuckled. Let me guess, the supplier disappeared with the money? Exactly, my grandmother exclaimed, and I heard her slam her palm on the table. Now the company is on the verge of bankruptcy. His father-in-law has lost almost everything and no longer speaks to him. I couldn't hold back a laugh, that bitter, quiet, but genuine one that escapes when fate suddenly decides to play in your favor, even through someone else's hands. And his wife? I asked, not so much out of curiosity as because I wanted to know if anyone was still around him. She's standing right next to me, Grandma replied, though they say she had a terrible fight with her parents over it. I listened and felt something strangely cool inside me. Not anger, not joy, just a cold detachment, as if I were hearing not about my family, but about characters from some TV series I once knew but had long forgotten. By then, I'd saved enough to put a down payment on a house. It was modest, old, with 4 bedrooms, on a quiet street where the evenings smelled of pine trees and someone's barbecue. The house needed renovations, serious, terrifying, almost insane, but it was mine. That day, when I signed the papers, my hands were shaking, my heart was pounding in my chest, and when the realtor shook my hand, I realized I was barely holding back tears. I did this, the daughter who was kicked out, the one no one believed in, the one who was left with nothing. I bought my own house. It was far from perfect, peeling wallpaper, creaky floors, a kitchen that looked like it had frozen in the 70s, an old refrigerator that hummed like a truck, but there was space, light, and a sense that I'd finally put down roots. My grandmother came to see it a week later. As soon as I walked in, she nodded approvingly, walked through the rooms, ran her finger along the windowsill, and said, you know, Brenda, this house is waiting for you to breathe life into it. And then, of course, she pulled out the receipt. Grandma, don't. I tried to protest, I can handle it myself, but she just waved her hand. I'm an old woman, let me help my granddaughter while I still can. This is your home, and it should be beautiful. With her help and hundreds of tutorials on YouTube, I set about renovating, at first hesitantly, then with enthusiasm. I learned to tile the bathroom, repaint the walls, sand the floors, and even install kitchen cabinets. Every little detail, every completed project felt like a victory, small but resounding. Every hammer strike was a challenge to my family, and with every can of paint, I proved them wrong when they thought I couldn't handle it. A year later, the house had been transformed. The walls were fresh and bright, the kitchen was modern and cozy, and in the garden, I planted jasmine and a few lavender bushes. And in the evenings, the scent filled the space, promising peace. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine, my home, my work, my pride. And then I decided, it was time to celebrate. I would throw a housewarming party, a real one, with wine, laughter, music, and the people who had been by my side all these years. I invited friends from work, a few friends from college, Sarah and Jessica, my grandmother, and a couple of distant relatives I still kept in touch with. It was a warm evening. The windows were open, laughter drifted from the kitchen, someone was grilling meat in the backyard, and my grandmother sat on the porch, watching everything with that soft smile that always warmed me more than any blanket. When the doorbell rang, I thought it must be one of my late coworkers. I grabbed a glass of wine, pushed a strand of hair out of my face, and opened the door, and froze. There they stood before me, my parents, my brother, Mark, his wife, and 2 children, a boy of about 9 and a toddler in his brother's arms. Brenda, my mother exclaimed, spreading her arms wide, as if those 10 years had simply vanished, as if they had never happened. We've missed you so much. We're all so proud of your accomplishments." I stood there, unable to breathe, the wine trembling in the glass, and time seemed to stand still. Their faces were the same, but something had changed. Mom had aged, Dad's eyes had grown duller, and Mark looked confused, as if he hadn't come of his own free will. Mom's arms were still outstretched, her smile dazzling and strained, but her gaze slid over the living room, over the furniture, over my friends, evaluating, familiar, the same one I'd been running from my whole life. "Aren't you going to invite us inside?" she asked loudly, so everyone could hear. It's been so long, and I, still unsure how to react, instinctively stepped aside, allowing them to enter, while everything inside me warred, resentment, confusion, and a strange, almost childish desire to run away somewhere where they couldn't find me again. They passed me by as if it were their right to pass, to enter, to settle in. As if all those years filled with silence and resentment simply didn't exist. Dad looked embarrassed, avoiding my gaze, as if he didn't know what to do with his hands, as if he couldn't believe he was standing on the threshold of my home. Mark hung back a little, like a boy caught in a lie, his eyes darting, and his wife, the same impeccably groomed blonde he married when I was just starting college, smiled tensely, almost apologetically, but her gaze, too, darted over the walls, the floor, every detail of the interior. Mom, however, burst inside like a storm, as if nothing had happened, as if it was she, and not me, who was the mistress of this house, the mistress of this life I had built from scratch. She immediately became the center of attention, as if the entire party had been waiting just for her. "Everyone, pay attention," she announced in a ringing voice, grabbing my hand and dragging me into the living room, where my friends and grandmother stood. "I'm Brandy's mom," she said with the pride that once burned into my bones, but now sounded false, like a poorly acted role. "We're so happy to finally see our daughter's beautiful home," she continued, looking around, and I could almost hear the counter clicking in her head. "The sofa isn't cheap, the wallpaper is tasteful. Someone's doing well here." And then, turning to me, with theatrical sadness in her voice, loud enough for everyone to hear, she said, "Darling, why did you leave us? Why haven't you spoken to us all these years?" The air in the room seemed to grow heavier, the conversations died down, the laughter died down. I saw Sarah awkwardly look away, Jessica bite her lip, Grandma tense, her face darkening. She started to rise, probably to intervene, but I quietly shook my head, stopping her. "Let's not do that now, Mom," I said evenly, though inside I was shaking. "It's a party, of course, dear, of course," she responded, with forced gentleness, with that same undercurrent of concern I hated. "We're just so glad you've had us." I had no intention of making a scene in front of the guests. Gritting my teeth, I forced a smile and walked around the room, introducing everyone to my family. "These are my parents, my brother Mark," and watched them explore the house, my mother running her fingers over the dresser I'd bought at a garage sale, my father examining the photographs on the wall, Mark and his wife whispering by the window, probably estimating how much such furniture cost. I just wanted to disappear, but I stood there, smiling, holding my glass so tightly the glass almost cracked. The party dragged on for another 2 agonizing hours. People gradually dispersed, some hugged me goodbye, others whispered that I had a wonderful grandmother, that I was strong, that they were proud of me. I thanked her, but it all sounded hollow. My grandmother was the last one left. She came over and hugged me tightly, just like the first time I came to her place after I'd been kicked out. "You can handle it, Brenda," she whispered softly, looking into my eyes. I nodded, though inside I was already seething. I called her a cab, waited for it to disappear around the corner, then closed the door and turned around, to find my uninvited guests comfortably settled in the living room, as if they were at home. "What are you doing here?" I finally asked, not raising my voice, but with that steely edge that didn't need shouting. "After 10 years of silence, you show up at my party unannounced." Mom's smile instantly vanished, her lips pursed, her eyes narrowed. "Well, that's not very welcoming, Brenda," she said coldly. "And I'm not feeling particularly welcoming," I replied. "How did you even know about the party?" Dad cleared his throat and, avoiding my gaze, said, "Cousin Rita mentioned it. We've been wanting to reconnect for a while." I laughed, briefly, bitterly. "Stop talking nonsense, what do you want?" They exchanged glances. Mark looked at his mother, who looked at his father. Mark's wife stood up and led the children upstairs, as if to let them see the house, and this simple, everyday gesture suddenly flared with pain within me. They were leading their children through my house. Through my space, which I had created myself, without them, without their help, without their faith. "We're having some difficulties," my mother finally said. "Business problems," Mark added, looking me in the eye for the first time. "I heard things aren't going well," I replied calmly. "Grandma keeps me informed." "It's just not fair." Mark exploded, and his voice took on that same whiny quality I remembered from childhood, when he complained about getting the smaller piece of cake. "You live in such a big house, alone, while we're about to lose everything." And there it was. That's why they came, not for love, not for reconciliation, for profit, to squeeze out of me what I'd earned through my own labor. "Do you seriously think I should save you after you kicked me out and deprived me of my family?" I asked, my voice ringing with suppressed anger. "That was a different time," my father tried to intervene. "You were young, strong, you could cope, and you," I interrupted, "aren't young, and can't." They remained silent. I stepped closer. "You're adults, you have jobs, savings, connections, figure it out yourselves." My mother's face hardened, almost like stone. "The bank is taking our house," she said, and for the first time her voice wavered. "We have nowhere to go." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Rent an apartment," I replied. "That's what I had to do." Mark stood in the middle of the living room, clutching his two small children like a shield, as if they could protect him from shame, from the truth, from the consequences of everything he'd ever done. He gestured toward the stairs, where his wife and the little ones had already disappeared, and said softly, almost pleadingly, "Be reasonable, Brenda." I felt something snap inside me, not loudly, but dully, like the crack of old glass that had held together until the very last moment and then finally shattered. "Reasonable?" I laughed bitterly, not even trying to hide the sarcasm. "You're telling me to be reasonable, Mark? After you dragged your pregnant girlfriend into my room without warning, kicking me out into the hallway like an outsider? After you, along with Mom and Dad, cut off my college funding because, you see, there's no place for ungrateful people in the family?" He looked away, pretending to study the pattern of the carpet. "We're family," he muttered, as if that could justify everything they'd done. Mom nodded, catching on, as she always did. "Mom insisted," he added a little louder, and I felt a familiar wave of irritation rise within me, because it always sounded the same. "Mom insisted, Mom decided, Mom said." No one ever argued with Mom, no one but me. "There's plenty of space in this house," Mark continued, his gaze roving around the room. "For bedrooms, you could easily have us." I glanced at the walls, at the books on the shelves, at the furniture I'd chosen myself, at the tiles I'd laid in the evenings after work, scrubbing the cement off my fingers until they bled. This house wasn't just a place to live, it was a symbol of my independence, my work, my pain, and my survival. It was my home, my life, and no one, not Mark, not Mom, not even their self-pity, had any right to him. "No," I said firmly, leaving no room for doubt. "You're not moving here, not now, not ever, never." Mom flushed. "But the children," she began, holding out her hands to me, as if trying to reach the girl she once held on her lap, but I had long since ceased to be that girl. "Mark has relatives," I replied sharply. "Ask them for help." Mark frowned, his face darkening. "They haven't spoken to us since the business went bankrupt," he said, and his voice was thick with self-pity, so thick and sticky that it made me want to recoil. "It's not my problem," I said coldly. "I want you all to leave right now." Dad, who had been silent this whole time, looked up. "You can't be serious, Brenda, we'll soon be homeless." I looked at him, at his gray hair, at the hands he once used to grip the steering wheel of the old pickup truck when he drove me to school, and felt a strange emptiness. "I'm completely serious," I said. "Get out of my house before I call the police." They froze. Shocked, as if they genuinely couldn't believe that I, their daughter, their sister, their little Brenda, wouldn't give in, wouldn't save them, wouldn't throw them a lifeline. But I stood my ground. After a few seconds of tense silence, Mom stood up abruptly. Mark picked up the kids, and they, without looking at me, began to get ready. I followed them as they walked to the door. I needed to see them go. Mom turned around already at the threshold. Her face was a mixture of anger, resentment, and something else, perhaps fear. "It's not over yet," she said, her voice ringing like a taut string. "Sooner or later, you'll understand what I'm talking about." "Don't count on it," I replied. closing the door so tightly that the house shook. I barely slept that night. I lay in the dark, listening to the ticking of the clock, and kept thinking about how they'd looked over my house, not with surprise, not with joy, but with calculation, with the greedy interest with which they evaluate other people's property. They were already assigning rooms, already seeing who would sleep where, already making plans for my life, as if it were a continuation of their failures. The next morning, my phone buzzed with messages. The first was from my mother. "Sorry we surprised you so, let's talk when you've calmed down." The second was from my father. "Your mother is very upset, she's having a hard time, call her." By midday, Mark called, his voice was shaking. "The bank sent the final eviction notice, we have 2 weeks, please reconsider." I didn't answer. I simply put the phone on the table and went out into the garden, breathing in the scent of damp grass, trying not to think, not to feel, but they didn't stop. The messages came one after another, pictures of bank letters, pictures of Mark's children sitting on the floor with the caption, "They have nowhere to go," tearful voicemails from my mother, where she spoke of family responsibility, of maternal love, of me being the only hope. When I blocked their numbers, they started texting from other numbers, unfamiliar numbers, short messages in which I recognized their intonations, their persistence. And then, one night, the phone rang, an unknown number. I picked it up. "Why aren't you answering our calls?" my mother asked. Her voice was even, almost matter of fact, and that made it even scarier. "Because I have nothing to say to you, don't text me anymore. We'll come see you next week," she said calmly, as if I hadn't said a word. "Once you see the children, you won't be able to kick us out." I closed my eyes and answered quietly but firmly, "Watch me, I won't let you go, don't waste your time." I hung up, then immediately dialed my grandmother. Her voice was tired but warm. She admitted that my parents had pressured her, urging me to accept them. "I told them I support whatever you decide," she said, "and I do, Brenda, they made their choice 10 years ago." A few days later, my neighbor, Mr. Harrison, stopped by, the same one who lives across the street and always brings mail when the postman mixes up the boxes. "Hey, just wanted to say, there was a guy hanging around your house yesterday, looking in your windows. I thought you should know." A chill ran down my spine. "What did he look like?" I asked, and when he described him, his height, his gait, his light-colored jacket, I realized it matched Mark perfectly. The next day, I woke up with a feeling like something sharp and wary had settled inside me, preventing me from breathing or relaxing. I knew Mark wouldn't stop, that their desperation had now become something obsessive, almost dangerous, so I did what I should have done earlier. I called an installer and installed cameras around the entire perimeter of the house, above the gate, by the porch, under the carport, and in the backyard. It was expensive, especially for me, since every penny in this house had once been earned through hard work and sleepless nights, but the peace of mind, the sense of control over my life, was worth every penny. After the installer left, I stood by the door with the remote control in my hand, staring at my phone screen, which now displayed every movement in the yard. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I could breathe a little more freely. But a week later, I realized how right I was to install those cameras. It happened in the middle of the workday. As I was checking a report on my computer, my phone vibrated quietly. A notification appeared on the screen, "Motion detected in the backyard." I automatically opened the app, thinking it might be the neighbor's cat, or a raccoon, or the mailman who'd gotten lost, but when the image loaded, I went cold. On the screen were Mark and his wife. They were walking across my lawn, around the house, stopping to point at each other's windows, and animatedly discussing something. At one point, Mark pointed at the back door and said something to his wife, and she nodded. I felt a ringing in my ears, whether from anger or fear. I immediately texted my grandmother. "Mark's back at my house." I typed with trembling fingers, watching like a burglar. She called back almost immediately. Her voice was quiet but agitated. "Brenda, the bank has foreclosed on their house," she said. "They have 2 weeks to vacate it. I thought you should know. Be prepared." I thanked her, but a cold, heavy wave rose inside me. I knew they were coming. That Saturday morning, I woke before dawn, as if my body sensed the approaching storm. I made coffee, sat by the window, and watched the light slowly filter through the autumn fog. Everything inside me was tense, as if I was expecting an alarm to sound at any second, and it came. Around 8 o'clock, my phone vibrated again, and the security system displayed a message, "Movement in the driveway." I lifted the screen, and my heart pounded as if it were trying to escape my chest. On camera, I saw two cars. My parents were in one, Mark's family was in the other. Their trunks were open, the back seats filled with boxes, suitcases, blankets, children's toys, and bags of clothes. They looked like they weren't about to leave. My mother got out first, looked around the house, nodded to my father, and started giving orders, as if this was an operation and she was its general. They were stacking boxes by my door as if it were a warehouse. Then the phone rang, insistently, once, twice, then a knock. I didn't answer. I watched the phone screen, where I could see my mother pressing her palm to the door glass and shouting, "Brenda! We know you're in there. Open up." Then her voice grew harsher, "Get up, we're not leaving until you come out." For about 15 minutes they rang, knocked, and called me while I sat on the stairs, clutching my now cold coffee mug. Finally, I stood up, walked to the door, and tugged it open with the chain. "What do you want?" I asked, though I knew the answer without words. Mom smiled tightly, her gaze cold and determined. "Let us in, Brenda, we're here to be with you now, we brought your things." I shook my head. "I already told you no, go away." Then Mark's wife began to cry, quietly, intermittently, hiding her face in her hands, and the youngest child, hearing her, began to cry too. The eldest stood nearby, confused, looking from me to his parents, not understanding why the adults were talking so loudly. Mom turned to me abruptly, "Look what you're doing to the children. How can you be so cruel?" I took a slow breath, trying not to lose my temper. "I'm not cruel, Mom, I set boundaries. You can't just show up at someone's house and expect everything to be yours. This is my home, and I don't have to save you from the consequences of your decisions." Dad stepped forward, his hands outstretched pleadingly. "Brenda, be reasonable, we have nowhere else to go." I looked at him straight. "That's not true, and you know it. You have options, just not the ones you want. You don't need help, Dad, you need the free version." At that moment, my phone beeped again, another notification from the security system. "Motion detected, back door." I glanced at the screen, and my blood ran cold. I saw Mark on the camera. He was creeping toward the back door, crouched, holding something in his hand. Then I heard a scraping sound. He was trying to pick the lock. I slammed the door in my parents' faces and immediately locked it. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. "Someone's trying to break into my house." I gasped into the phone. The dispatcher asked me to describe the situation, and, gasping for air, I explained what was happening, that the camera showed a man trying to open the back door. Mark's irritated voice came from the backyard, muffled, angry, and then suddenly there was a crash, as if he'd slammed his shoulder against the door. Mom, Dad, and Mark's wife had been standing at the entrance the whole time, continuing to knock, shouting my name, trying to distract me, as if they hadn't noticed what Mark was doing. But I knew, they were just pretending it was a mistake, emotions, a misunderstanding. A few minutes later, I heard the wail of sirens. It was getting closer, getting louder. Mark jumped back from the door, froze, then abruptly ran toward the front yard, where his parents were standing. I watched through the screen, feeling a shudder run through my body, not even from fear, but from some acute, unbearable realization. They had crossed a line from which there was no turning back. I opened the door to the police, trying to speak calmly, though my hands were still shaking and my heart was pounding like it wanted to burst out of my chest. I quickly explained the situation to them, showing them the security footage, which showed Mark creeping toward the back door, looking around, and then fiddling with the lock, holding something metal in his hand. One of the officers frowned. The other nodded silently and stepped to the window to look out into the yard. "That's trespassing," I said, feeling my voice break. He tried to break down my door. My mother, standing behind me, flushed sharply. "We didn't break in. We're family. We just wanted to talk to our daughter and move in with her until we sorted out the housing issue. She's our child, after all." The officer turned to her and asked calmly but firmly, "Did she invite you to live here?" My mother hesitated, glanced at my father, then whispered, "Well, no, but this is her house, and she has so much space, and she's alone." The officer nodded briefly and said, "Then you're trespassing, and trying to enter without permission is trespassing." "That's ridiculous," my father shouted, stepping forward. "We're homeless, do you understand? We've lost everything. And she has 4 bedrooms. What kind of person rejects their own family?" His words struck me, not with guilt, but with the recognition of an old, debilitating manipulation, the same one that had been woven throughout my life. I took a deep breath and looked at the officers. One of them asked bluntly, "Do you want to press charges?" In that moment, time seemed to stand still. I saw them all, the mother with her blazing eyes, the father who couldn't admit his mistakes, Mark's wife clutching her children by the shoulders, and Mark himself, standing to the side with a blank, dull expression. Before me were the very people who had once thrown me out of the house when I had decided to live my life my way, not the way they considered right. Part of me craved justice, wanted to say yes, let them face the consequences of their actions for once in their lives, but another part, tired, drained, just wanted peace. "No," I finally said, "I just want them to leave and never come back." The police officers exchanged glances, then one of them sternly declared that any further approach to my property would be considered a violation of the law, and they had better leave the station immediately. They obeyed. My parents and Mark and his family silently packed their things back into their cars, not a single one of them uttering a word, only when my mother, getting into the passenger seat, turned around and cast me a long, piercing glance. It was everything: reproach, bitterness, contempt, and pity, as if I were a monster and not their grown daughter defending her home. The next day, a new battle began, only this time not at my doorstep, but online. My mother launched her campaign. She published a long post on Facebook about how a heartless daughter refused to shelter a homeless family with small children, how she lives alone in a four-room house, and how family values have been lost in our time. She tagged all her relatives, neighbors, mutual acquaintances, even colleagues from my previous job. At first, I tried to ignore it, but soon my phone started ringing off the hook. Aunts, cousins, old family friends, even a teacher from school, all saying the same thing: "Brenda, how could you? These are your parents." Some minced no words, others tried to sound gentle but still judged. I stopped answering calls, then deleted my social media app, then changed my number altogether. My world narrowed to my work, my home, the rare evenings with friends, and brief conversations with my grandmother, who, as always, remained the only voice of reason amidst all this chaos. Several months passed, and then one day she called. Her voice sounded lighter, calmer. "They found an apartment," she said, "small, but clean, and Mark got a job in a warehouse, not what he's used to, but it's stable work." I paused for a second, then said, "Well done," and it was true. I didn't wish them ill will, I just didn't want them in my life again. "Your mother asked me to pass on a message," my grandmother added after a pause. I exhaled. "She says she wants to meet, apologize, talk things over." I laughed mirthlessly. "Let me guess, they need rent money again." Grandma sighed. "Probably. What should I tell her?" "Tell her I'm not interested, and if they try to contact me again, I'll get a restraining order." I haven't spoken to any of them since. Almost a year has passed, and my life has taken shape again. Home has become more than just a place to live, but a true refuge, a place of peace and security. Work was going well. I recently got a promotion, and for the first time in a long time, I felt proud of how I persevered. On Sundays, my grandmother comes to visit. We cook dinner together, laugh, reminisce about the past, not the painful ones, but the truly important ones. I see friends who stayed close even when everything around me was crumbling. And, perhaps for the first time in many years, I'm allowing someone to come closer again. There's a man I've started dating, calm, attentive, demanding nothing but honesty. He knows I'm not easy, that trust isn't a gift for me, but hard work, and he doesn't rush me. Sometimes someone asks me if I miss my family, and I always answer the same thing: I miss the relationship I thought we had. I miss the feeling of being part of something warm, real, and reliable. But not them, not these people who turned away when I became inconvenient and only came back when they needed me. I learned to distinguish love from need, and now I finally live the way I always wanted, without fear, without guilt, without their shadow on my doorstep.